Okay, well then let's welcome the mayor of Knox County, Glenn Jacobs. Mayor, are you there?
Hey, Ben, don't you love this Zoom stuff?
Mayor, I don't love it. No, I do not love it. You just saw me tap dancing for a bit, but
well, I came in right as you were saying, let's go to a break. I'm like, oh, no, I'm here. Hold on a second.
There we go. Okay, well, good. Well, Mayor, I've introduced you maybe longer and better than almost any introduction you've had. I went through all kinds of things, and I covered in your history the fact that you were a World Wrestling Entertainment, a three-time world champion, infamous Kane. We're not going to talk about that, but I'm just throwing that out there that's the case. You are chair of Tennessee for Congressional Term Limits. So, and that's sponsored by U.S. term limits. What is U.S. term limits? How likely is it that we could ever have term limits?
Well, it's not very likely at all if Congress has their way, and that's what U.S. term limits is all about. It's an organization dedicated to imposing term limits on Congress through the use of an Article 5 convention, which is a convention of the states to propose an amendment to the United States Constitution. In this case, one that would term limit Congress.
So that's correct. There are a couple of ways this could happen, that we could actually have term limits, right? It could be passed by Congress, is that right? Or we can go through the states.
Sure.
And U.S. term limits is trying to do both, is that right? Are you trying both approaches?
No. So according to the Constitution, Article 5 of the Constitution allows two ways to amend the Constitution. One is that Congress could do it themselves by a 2/3 vote of both the Senate and the House. And then that legislation, that proposed amendment, would go to the states, which would have to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. The other way is that the states could do it themselves by 2/3 of the states calling for a specific amendment, a U.S. or a term limit for Congress amendment. And it's the same thing. It would go, the convention of the states would send delegates, and they would look at the proposed amendment and the language, and then come to an agreement, send that proposed amendment back to the state legislatures for a 3/4 of the states ratification. Congress could probably do this legislatively. No, they can't actually, because it is part of the Constitution that says what they're, that they have. There is no term limits. Now, the president, of course, has a term limit on what he can do. He can only serve twice. But up until now, Congress has chosen not to do that. And of course, they're not going to. I mean, Congress has no reason to term limit themselves. So I believe, as well as many other people and the folks at U.S. term limits, that the only way that we are ever going to get Congress term limited, which I do believe is important, is if the states pursue an Article 5 convention and make Congress term limit, basically. Not make them term limit themselves, but mandate a term limit on Congress.
Why are you so passionate about this? Why is this something that you're chair of Tennessee? You're running Knox County, but this is something else you're taking on. Why is this? Why are you passionate about it?
Our country is divided like never before, it seems. And there's one thing that we can all agree on, though, and that's Congress is broken. And there hasn't seemed to be any way to fix it. I believe that this is a way to help begin fixing it. There's so much money and power involved at the federal level. And with Congress, again, instead of citizen legislatures, which we have in Tennessee at the state level, we have basically people go to Congress and that becomes their career. They become professional politicians who in some cases spend years, even decades in Congress. And it's very hard to remove them through the electoral process because 95% of Congress people are reelected and 97% of the PAC money that goes into elections goes to incumbents. So the electoral process, unfortunately, we're not going to see success in getting new people in Congress. And I think that's important. You have new ideas. It also breaks up the power structure that in many cases becomes the enemy for all of us. So all of those things, I think that the term limits question is a way to kind of put Congress back in the box where it belongs.
We here in Davidson County have a fairly large metro council. it was determined that there would be term limits for our Metro Council. And that passed overwhelmingly. So now our Metro Council is term limited. That's a fairly new development. One of the things that you will hear some council members say is that with term limits, we lose some of that institutional knowledge. So we have a constant kind of changing of the guard. There are constant fresh faces and new ideas, but there is no institutional knowledge, and that in some cases hurts. So what do you say if that is a criticism? That if we're going to,
I don't believe that's true, and I don't believe that's true from my own experience. Here in Knox County, we also have term limits on elected officials. Everybody can serve 2 terms at county commission, RFE offices, and the mayor. But there's still a lot of institutional knowledge among my staff, among people that have been here for many years. And I do rely on that very heavily. And at the federal government level, we see the same thing. You know, there are people that have been in various departments for many years. And they stay there in lots of cases, no matter what the administration changes, Congress, and all those sort of things. So I do reject that because I've seen it here. And if you're good at your job, you're going to keep your job. Okay. And a lot of the institutional knowledge resides in Knox County. It resides in the department heads and the people from the departments. At the federal government, it's the same way. It resides not necessarily with the elected officials, but with the people that are working for them and for us as well.
We are so divided in so many ways, as you mentioned. And yet, if you ask many people if they like their congressman, the answer is yes. And so they'll rail on against Congress. Oftentimes, our individual congresspeople will rail on against Congress. And yet, our individual congresspeople keep getting reelected. Now, you're saying that's PAC money, that's this kind of thing. But that argument is, I mean, there is a term limit already set, and that is an election. So does this take some power away from people to keep someone in there who they like? What about that concern?
Sure, that's an argument. Again, when we're weighing the positives and negatives, you know, for an incumbent has massive advantages when it comes to an election, just massive advantages. And it's the power, it's the money, it's the structure, it's everything. So I think that, and that's actually when I was talking with the U.S. term limits people, this is something that I brought up, is what is someone that does a good job, and I like them. I think it far outweighs, though, when we have new ideas, when we break that power structure. I think that far outweighs, you know, having someone who is good stay there for a long period of time. And I think our country's in a lot of trouble if, you know, we say out of however many hundreds of thousands of people that reside in a congressional district, if there's only one person in that district that can do a good job. Okay. I think that there's probably more than that. And this gives those people an opportunity to get in there with their ideas and hopefully make a difference themselves.
At the top of the show, you detailed there's a 2-tier track, like you said, to amend the Constitution and make term limits the law of the land. It sounds like they both take a very long time. What is your most optimistic assessment of when we could actually have term limits?
It will be many years, I'm afraid, but we'll never get them if we don't start now. You know, last year in Tennessee, the State House passed the House Joint Resolution 8, which calls for Tennessee to join 4 other states, Florida, Alabama, West Virginia, and Missouri, with the call for term limits. There needs to be, will become hopefully the 5th state next year, if and when the Senate passes the House Joint Resolution 8 themselves, their version of that. But there still has to be 29 other states that join the call for convention, and then it has to go back to the states for ratification. So it is a process that will probably take years. But again, the longer that we wait to get it started, the longer it's going to be before it actually.
As chair of the Tennessee,
if I can say,
oh yeah,
and if I can say something too, and this is amending the Constitution is not something that we should take lightly. So that process is there for a reason. So you want to make sure you get it right. So despite the fact that it is a heavy lift and it is a long time, that is by design, and I think that's important.
As chair of Tennessee for congressional term limits, you mentioned this resolution's passed in the House. It still must pass in the Senate. Do you think there's a problem, or do you feel like there's overwhelming support? What kind of support do you see in the Senate? And we're talking about the Tennessee Senate.
Sure. Yes, the state Senate. Among the people of Tennessee, it's overwhelmingly popular. 78% of the folks here in Tennessee support term limits. I think there's a bit of an education process, no matter who you're talking with. But that's part all about is ensuring their elected officials understand the process and understand why it's so important. So I think it stands a good chance in the Senate. I don't know the numbers myself because I haven't talked to all the senators. But here in Tennessee, Tennessee's in a really good spot compared to other states in the country because our General Assembly does a good job, frankly. So I am confident that the precise people in the Senate will come to an affirmative vote on this. Care about our country.
Now I get nervous because I'm seeing. I hope we don't lose your Zoom, but
no,
you can give us all your power here to keep this Zoom going. All right, we've done shows on wanting to change the Electoral College. There are groups out there that want to change the Electoral College. There's some states that predictably want to do that. There's some states that predictably don't want to do that. Maybe it's partisan. I'll let others kind of decide. But I think it's a factual statement. There's some that want to do it. There's some that don't. Are there some parts of the country that are more interested in term limits? Are there some states that are more likely to do it? What are you finding when you look at the map that needs to get you where you need to be?
I'm sure that it is more popular in some places than others. But I can just tell you anecdotally that I think that term limits, the idea of congressional term limits, enjoys overwhelming support. And we see it around the country. Here in Tennessee, the governor's term limited, as I said, in Knox County. I'm term limited in Nashville. Your elected officials are term limited. So it seems like it's pretty much everywhere, but at the federal government, at that level, that people would like to see. I think people want to see term limits because we've seen them everywhere else. And I'm sure that given the opportunity that most people would like to see term limits on Congress.
And a question I ask when guests come on. So you're sponsored by U.S. Term Limits. What is U.S. Term Limits, and who pays the bills for U.S. Term Limits?
U.S. Term Limits, again, it's an organization that's dedicated to the idea of promoting congressional term limits. It was started by a couple gentlemen, and from there has blossomed around the country. I believe it's a 501c4, which is a political nonprofit. So you have you have some individuals that pay the bills as well as they solicit donations from people to keep the lights on.
And is it more Republican, Democrat? Is it partisan?
No, it's not. It's a nonpartisan effort.
All right. And again, how optimistic are you that we'll actually see this? And then I'm going to start taking calls. I'm going to open it up for calls.
Sure.
But your bottom line assessment, how optimistic are you that this is realistic?
I think it's realistic. Will it be 5 years? Probably. Will it be 10 years? It may be. Will it be longer than that? It certainly could be. Will it be next year? No. So I think that it will take a while, and it's a lot of effort as well. Once Tennessee signs on next year, that still leaves 29 other states to go. So that is a bit of a lift. But I think, too, what could happen along the way is perhaps the Congress sees which way the wind is blowing, and it'd be great if they decide to do this themselves as well. So we never can tell. I think the most important thing is that we start the process and get it in motion. And the sooner that we can do that, the sooner we see where the chips fall.
All right, I'm encouraging people to call in. Wow, I just lost myself on Zoom, but now I see myself. I'm encouraging people to call in there, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. What are your thoughts on term limits? What do you want to ask the Knox County mayor about term limits? So we'll take a break and come back and just start taking calls. So several lines open. Give us a call. I'll be back right after this. Well, welcome back to Open Line, everybody. We are talking about term limits, congressional term limits here in Tennessee and across the country. What are the chances that'll happen? We are talking with the Knox County Mayor, Glenn Jacobs. He's chair of Tennessee for Congressional Term Limits. And I'm encouraging people to call in. Let's go to the phones. Let's go to Mike. Hello, Mike.
Hello. Good evening, Ben, and good evening to the mayor of Knox County.
Hey, Mike.
The problem I have, when people used to mention term limits, my answer would be, well, we have term limits, and that's going to vote to the ballot box. But when you have people who don't vote, it comes to a point where you have to have term limits. The way I see it, and this gets to the base point, I always felt like at this point we need to have some type of fine for those who don't vote, as like the IRS. If you're late for filing your taxes, you get fined. And we need to also have a dedicated time off to allow for people to vote so there's no excuse. First of all, when you look at Senator Jesse Helms of South Carolina, that senator was nearly 100 years old when he was still in the chamber. Literally, they had to almost bring him in with paramedics and an ambulance almost every day. That's how bad off he was. Staffers had to read bills for him. He was that debilitated. As you would be at 100 years old. It wasn't too long after he finally stepped down that he died. We can't have things like that. That's just ridiculous. And once people are in there, like the mayor said, an incumbent has a lot of power. They've made a lot of connections. They've networked with so many different corporations, different lobbying groups, and they have that upper hand. And also, like our state, we went from a billionaire governor to a millionaire governor. And as long as we have people with a load of cash, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And at that point, I say there's no other option but to have a term limit. Like I hope Marsha Blackburn would have one term. That would be perfect with me. But we do need to have term limits. And I think it's something that's definitely open for discussion. And
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Mike, thanks for your call. So he has a lot to say there. What do you think about what Mike has to say?
Well, I think the most pertinent point for me was reaffirming that just the power of the incumbency and the relationships that are built, the name recognition. You're in the media all the time. You're on the news just all the time. So you have these built-in advantages as an incumbent that are extremely hard to overcome as someone that's trying to unseat that person. So those things make it extremely difficult. And yes, I mean, we can talk about elections, and I agree, that elections elections are a form of term limits, but it's extremely difficult in many cases. It's almost not fair, the advantages that an incumbent has in an election.
When you're talking about term limits, what are you talking about for a member of Congress and for a member of the U.S.
Yes.
Senate? What are we
Yes.
talking about?
Yeah, and that's what the Article 5 convention would discuss, is what exactly that looks like. For instance, to me, if I were a delegate, I've never been approached about that, so this is just Glenn's opinion. It would be serving a total of 6 terms in the House and 2 terms in the Senate. So you could actually serve 12 years in the House and you could serve 12 years in the Senate. But when we see people that are there for decades, that's just a really long time. But as far as what the structure and the actual substance of a constitutional amendment would look like, that's what this convention would be for, is to work that out among the state delegates.
Interesting. Okay, let's go to Joe. Hello, Joe.
Hello?
Hello, Joe. What's on your mind?
Hi.
I was going to say, I'm not sure if this is exactly what about term limits, but in ancient Greece, the senators couldn't vote on anything without the people's approval that they represented. Nowadays, we got senators up there can get bought off by a huge corporation and vote in a way that people don't even know what they're voting about or anything. And if we could do something like that, I believe that would eliminate the corruption right there, people being bought off and things. But anyway, that's all I had to say.
All right. I'm not totally sure about that, but he's wanting more democracy. He feels like, as a cynical sort of, I mean, it's again, Congress is bought and paid for by big corporate interests. I mean, that's kind of the sense. I don't know how you would, I guess, what do you think about what Joe's expressing here?
Well, in a nation of our size, direct democracy of that kind would be extremely difficult, of course. And we're a representative republic, we're a democratic republic, which means that the democratic process is we basically instill our confidence in a representative and they vote for us. So I certainly understand, not feeling that Congress does not represent the people. I think in the cases we all feel like that. But I think going back to term limits, again, when we look at the relationships that happen over a long period of time, so much of the power in Washington, D.C., in Congress resides in the committees. It resides in seniority. It resides in how long you've been there. So for my friends on the right, they have Speaker of the House that they don't like. She's been there forever. That's why she's Speaker of the House. My friends on the right have folks in the Senate that are in very powerful positions there. Those very powerful positions because they've been there so long. And it does feel like if you were in Washington, D.C. for that period of time, you're almost living in a bubble where your constituents become less and less important, and the people you spend most of your time with, or the people in Washington, become more and more important. So I think that a direct democracy of that kind is not really feasible in a nation of our size, but term limits can certainly help compel our representatives to be more representative of what we believe.
We have current lawmakers in Tennessee. We have current 2 U.S. senators and several Congress people. Are there some that support this idea? Are you aware of some that do support it?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a website that you can go to learn more about U.S. term limits. That's termlimits.com. But in Tennessee, my congressman, Congressman Tim Burchett, there's a pledge that the Congress can take. They've signed the pledge. I think Bill Hagerty signed the pledge. Marsha Blackburn has signed the pledge. And then around the state, I know that other Congress people, House representatives have also signed a pledge. So yes, I think that the idea is actually pretty popular among our congressional delegation here in Tennessee. And
as you said, it's popular among the voters, and so it seems like they could put pressure on the Congress people to move this along. And so,
I think that's one thing that people can do. Well, yeah, I am, and I think that's one of the things that I would really like to see is candidates making a pledge to sign the pledge for term limits. I think that would help everyone.
It's almost depressing, though, in a way. It's almost like, everyone is saying, I mean, you take that last caller, Joe, very cynical, corporate interests control Congress right now. And I mean, Joe, it's not like he's in a bottle there. There are plenty of people that would maybe say those same sort of things. And yet again, our same people keep getting reelected. So there's this enormous frustration with Congress, and yet individual incumbents keep getting reelected. And so it's almost like the system is not working. We don't, why can't we make it work? Why can't we, there is a chance for term limits every 2 years if it's somebody in Congress and every 6 years if it's somebody in the U.S. Senate. And it seems like it should work. If people are that frustrated, they should be able to go to the polls and exercise their right.
Well, again, I think that so much of it is because incumbents wield such massive power in elections. You know, I mean, when someone is able, because they're an elected official and they're on the news almost every night. You know, name recognition plays such a huge role in all of this. When they've built the relationships, that's extremely difficult to overcome. When I was running for office, you know, there was no way, even at a local level, that I would have run against an incumbent because it just is incredibly hard, you know, and incredibly hard to beat someone that has been there for any length of time. And it gets even more so at the congressional level. So, no, I think the system, unfortunately, the system is broken. And so much of it has to, we talk about the money in politics, and sadly, I don't see any way to get the money out of politics. And I wish there was, but so long as all that money is there, so long as the influence is there, it's very hard for someone from the outside to be able to come in and to beat an incumbent.
All right, very good. We are talking term limits with the Knox County Mayor, Glenn Jacobs. We will take a break. Come back, take more calls. If you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this. Welcome back to Open Line, everybody. We are talking term limits tonight. Chance to call in, give your comment, question, whatever, about term limits. We have with us the Knox County Mayor, Glenn Jacobs. He's chair of Tennessee for Congressional Term Limits, joining us via Zoom. And we've been talking about term limits for the first half of the show, but it's unusual we have the Knox County Mayor on. And so it's also maybe a good idea for me to just ask a question or two about some of the big issues facing Knox County. So our signal goes all over Middle Tennessee. But Knox County, Nashville, two big cities, you know, Knoxville, Nashville. What are some of the big issues there that you're dealing with in Knox County?
I think they're going to be some of the same things that everyone deals with around the state of Tennessee. The opioid and substance misuse epidemic is a big problem. Mental health issues have become more and more of a problem. Our workforce and aligning our educational system with what the workplace needs, that's something that we are invested in and are working on as well. You know, and then we have just the issues that everybody faces in a particular way as far as infrastructure, things like stormwater and, you know, planning for additional growth, which I know is, you know, something that's really big in Nashville. And we see the same thing. We have a lot of people moving here. We're an attractive area. How do we deal with that? How do we ensure that, you know, we don't end up with massive congestion? Our housing prices are going through the roof. You know, how can we try to alleviate that to some extent? You know, we're talking about affordable housing. It's really workforce housing. You know, the people that are coming here to work or people that are already here looking to buy a home. It's becoming more and more difficult. So those are problems I think that everyone across the state is facing.
What about taxes? Have you had to taxes in the pandemic? Have you had to raise taxes? Have you been able to keep it the same? Where are you on taxes?
When we were going into the height of the pandemic last year, it was actually around our budget season. And of course, we were preparing for an apocalypse when it came to tax revenues. We're extremely concerned with what our sales tax would look like. But we have weathered the storm very well. It's interesting across the state. We've actually seen higher than baseline sales tax revenue collection. So we've been extremely fortunate with all the federal money that's coming down. You know, there's a lot of projects that actually before would have been very difficult for us to do monetarily, but we are looking at those now. So we're in a very good fiscal situation, actually stronger than a year ago, as ironic as that may sound.
Fascinating. All right, that's interesting. Always good to go to Reverend Fuzz. Reverend Fuzz is on the line. Hello, Reverend Fuzz.
Hey, Dan, I got a question, okay?
Yes, sir.
Well, I guess Nashville did term limits on the city council. I don't know how many years ago. It seemed like forever. Some years ago. And some people would say that actually kind of hurt the city in terms of having that knowledge on the council. So for the guests tonight, how really important is this term limit thing? I mean, why don't we think of these men and women who are elected, who want to stay there forever, as being good people who want to do the best thing for the nation? And the longer they stay, after you've been there 12 years, look like you set up some contacts and connections and knowledge and information that's good for the nation, that we've grown some good leaders now. So why aren't these good people, why shouldn't we be happy to have wise old men and women who've been doing the job for 15 years, who've learned where all the bones are hidden? That's kind of my question. Why we want to get rid of it? I'm not saying whether I'm for or against. I'm just asking that question.
Reverend Fuzz, thank you. Always great to hear from Reverend Fuzz, and I hope you're doing okay. So I asked that a little bit at the top about our experience here, but Reverend Fuzz takes it even a step further. These are servants. They've been there a long time. They have great knowledge. Why should we kick them out? And you heard his question there. What do you say?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of people out there would actually not agree that they're really wise people. They've been there a long time, but in some cases, I think that everyone would really like to see a change. And I think, too, it's important when we talk about folks like their congressperson, but they don't like Congress. Part of the reason for that, too, is because that person, your congressperson, has a lot of power within the district that they live in to bring things to the district, which is endearing, as far as getting stuff done within the district. But it's probably not great for the country. When we look at our fiscal situation here, we have $30 trillion in debt or more. I just mentioned that the federal government is spending a lot of money, which is, as a local official, that's wonderful, but there's massive price to pay, and that's a huge amount of debt. So basically, in many cases, your local congressperson is able to appeal to the voters by the money that they bring in. And that's also a cycle, I think, that needs to be broken. Certainly, as an elected official, all of us try to do the best that we can for our district. But we also need to look at a bigger picture, and are we doing the best that we can for the country? When we see people that have been there for many years, in fact, decades, I don't think that's necessarily the case. And the wisdom is it's not always, or the institutional knowledge, it's not always, we talked about before, it's not always reside within the elected official. It's within the folks that stay there throughout different administrations and changes within the government. So I think that really there is a balance that can be reached. And again, I don't think when we talk about term limits, anyone's saying that someone's going to go to Congress, stay there for 2 years, and that's it. I think that we're more talking about, a number of terms, whatever that may be. But we're looking at the career politicians, not someone that might want to go up there for a couple terms and come home, frankly, which is what the founders envisioned as opposed to what we have now.
That's an interesting point, that because they're the ones that are, I guess, getting the federal funding, that does tend to ingratiate them, no matter who they are, to their constituents back home.
Sure.
I mean, that makes a good point. Sure. It's interesting what Reverend Fuzz said, and I think kind of what he may be getting at is you're term limited for 12 years. In that 11th year, you're going to be thinking about what's my next job. and you're going to be maybe not focused on the work of the people, you're not focused on getting reelected, you're focused on what you're going to do. And I think he was expressing there might be some concern with that.
Sure. And that's the case too. But right now, you're not going to be focused on the job either because you're out campaigning, frankly, in many cases. So again, there's another point to that. And especially when we see that with representatives, they're at a 2-year term, so they're pretty much constantly campaigning. So the argument could be when they get to the later stages of a term limited career, since they're done and they're not going to be campaigning anymore, they can actually concentrate on getting some things done, and they might be able to concentrate on getting some things done that are important but not necessarily super popular, because as officials, sometimes we do have to make those decisions. So in that respect, it might insulate them, from thinking if I do this, it's the right thing to do, but it might cost me some percentage points in an election because I don't have an election to worry about it.
Interesting. Reverend Fuzz, thank you for that question. Back to our conversation about Knox County. You said people are moving there like crazy. We're certainly seeing that here in Davidson County. We're worried about gentrification. We're certainly worried about housing prices and affordable housing. So it sounds like are you worried about some of those very same things? I mean, what are you seeing as far as people moving in and housing prices?
Our housing prices are going up. Our housing market is extremely hot. Our housing inventory has depleted, and literally the houses can't be built fast enough at this point. So we are confronting some of the same challenges that Davidson County is, for sure.
Where are they coming from? Are they coming from other parts of the state? Are they coming from, I don't know, the north, the south? Why are all these people coming to Knox County? Why are they coming to Nashville? I'll ask you about Knox County. Why are they coming to Knox County?
Sure, because we're a great place to live. We just are. I mean, well, that's the case. And people have discovered it, and they want to move here. I moved here 26 years ago, and had lots of opportunities to live other places, and it's just such a wonderful place to live that I don't ever want to go anywhere else. So we are seeing people come here, especially from the high tax, high regulation jurisdictions. And we're seeing more businesses come here as well to escape the tax burdens of especially some of the states in the Northeast and places like California.
What about gentrification, which is a big issue here? Is that an issue there?
To some extent, but probably not as much as what you all are facing. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind when it comes to gentrification is really economic opportunity for everybody. And home ownership is something that's very important. So we want to ensure that people have the ability to buy a home. People have the ability to pay their rent. But if you're a homeowner, as your home appreciates in value, that makes you very happy because you can sell it for more. If you're a renter, when the place that you rent appreciates in value, that becomes problematic because the rent's going to go up. But it's many cases difficult for people to make that transition from renting to home ownership. So for me, it's all about economic opportunity, and ensuring that we have good jobs so that people can pay the rent to stay in a nicer place. But eventually they get into home ownership, which it's the basis of the American dream. I think it's very important. So that's something that we're really invested here. In fact, I think my job as mayor is to do what I can to ensure the most economic opportunity for the most people.
Interesting. All right, we will take a break. Come back, continue our discussion. Question about Knox County, go right ahead. Or term limits, our original topic. Should there be term limits? What do you think? There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.
After
Confident. News Channel 5 and great. Copy of Make Sure You Rebound.
every
Last seconds count.
out on some huge savings.
Get expert advice to find the best deals Thursday at 11.
Welcome Welcome back, everyone. We are talking with Glenn Jacobs, Knox County Mayor. He is chair of Tennessee for Congressional Term Limits, and so that's what our discussion is primarily focused on. And this is our last segment, and so I generally ask you, what do you want people to take away? You obviously support term limits. I feel like, all right, we had one caller that pushed back on it, a couple others that clearly support it. You know, what do you want people to take away as you embark on this mission for term limits in Tennessee?
Well, term limits are overwhelmingly popular with the electorate. Unfortunately, Congress is not so enthralled with term limits. But there is a way that we can term limit Congress, and that is through an Article 5 convention, a convention that's called by the states specifically to address and debate a constitution to the amendment to term limit Congress. That has to be done through 34 states calling for a convention. So far, 4 states have called for one. Tennessee will be the 5th. Last year, the House passed House Joint Resolution 8, which calls for a constitutional a convention to propose a term limit amendment. The Senate will take that up next year. That would make us the 5th state of the needed 34 to call for a convention. Once that happens, that proposed amendment would go back to the states for ratification. So it is possible, and it is possible to make Congress be term limited, not to ask them to be term limited.
I'm fascinated by the whole process, and I don't know the last time this happened. I remember the Equal Rights Amendment was certainly something that was being discussed, and I believe it failed. It failed by one state.
Yes.
We've been, women voting, we had the 100th anniversary of that, and that was just part of this process. And so that's interesting to me. Tennessee, you're saying, would be the 5th state. You feel like they'll be the 5th state. So it still sounds like there's a long way to go.
There is, and this process has never actually taken place. The other amendments have been proposed by Congress. A 2/3 vote of each chamber of commerce, chamber of the Congress, and then the amendment goes back to the states. So the states convention has never actually been done before. There's been 400 proposals among the various states, but the states have never agreed to a single convention for a single amendment to the Constitution.
Fascinating.
So we'd be breaking new ground. Yes.
Well, I didn't know that. So those others, this has always happened. It's been a 2/3 vote in Congress. And so you said we have Congress people in Tennessee that have signed on to this, and you said it's overwhelmingly popular. I believe that certainly polls would indicate that it is popular. And so if you're going to get elected, you need to sign on to this. If these people are signing on to it, it seems like you wouldn't be too far away from getting that 2/3 support in Congress. Do you have any idea where you are on that?
That I don't know. You can go to termlimits.com, and they have a list of the signers of the pledge there. But I do believe that it is important. This effort of getting the states called convention, I think, could also compel Congress to propose an amendment themselves as well. So either way, it would be great to see term limits enacted.
Well, Mayor, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you. It's good to talk a little bit about Knox County, and it's interesting to talk about this topic. So thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed myself.
Well, good. All right, we will take a break. We'll come back, wrap everything up right after this.